Have you ever found yourself in a bustling city, maybe grabbing a coffee, or perhaps stuck in a frustrating traffic jam, and wondered, why does my coffee cost this much? Or, why does traffic always seem to be at a standstill, no matter what time I leave? These are everyday experiences we all share, but rarely do we stop to think about the intricate, often invisible economic forces that are pulling the strings behind the scenes. Today, we're embarking on a fascinating journey into that hidden world of economics. It's a world that subtly yet profoundly shapes our lives every single day, often without us even realizing it. We're going to pull back the curtain and uncover some surprising insights into everything from why some companies are incredibly profitable while others struggle, to the complex dance of global trade, and even the fundamental reasons nations succeed or fail.
And our expert guide for this particular deep dive is Tim Harford's brilliant book, The Undercover Economist. This book is truly fantastic because it helps us to look beyond the superficial. It encourages us to see the underlying systems at play, the signals and negotiations, contests of strength, and battles of wits that ultimately determine so much of our economic reality. It's like having a secret decoder ring for the world around us.
Right. So our mission today is to extract the most important nuggets of knowledge and insight from this incredible work. We'll break down complex economic ideas into clear, digestible insights, making them accessible even if you're completely new to the world of economics. Get ready for some serious aha moments because we're about to show you how economists see the same things that are happening all around you every single day. Okay, let's start with a very relatable scenario. Imagine you're on your way to work, maybe a little sleep deprived, and you stop for a cappuccino. It costs, say, $4. But have you ever stopped to consider what the actual cost is to the coffee shop to make that cappuccino? We're talking about the raw materials, the milk, the beans, the cup and lid. It's probably not that much, right?
That's exactly right. The book cites economics professor Brian McManus, who found that markups on coffee are, well, pretty huge, around 150%. So a basic drip coffee selling for $1 might only cost the shop about 40 cents in materials. And a small latte selling for, say, $2.55 costs less than $1 in raw ingredients. So when you look at that huge difference between the cost of ingredients and the selling price, the obvious question arises. Who is actually making all that money?
Yeah, where is it going? You might immediately think it's the big coffee chain itself, like Starbucks.
Yeah.
Makes sense, right?
Sure, that's the first thought. But as the book points out, making a cappuccino isn't exactly rocket science.
Oh.
Setting up a coffee shop isn't an insurmountable challenge. It's not like building a semiconductor factory.
Okay.
So if it's relatively easy, why isn't there another coffee shop right next door undercutting Starbucks by charging, say, a flat $2? Why don't they just steal all of Starbucks' customers?
Good question.
This leads us directly to a really core economic concept called economic rent. And this isn't just about, paying rent for your apartment. It's a broader idea about extra profit or benefit derived from something that is scarce. To understand it, let's go back to a 19th century analogy from the economist David Ricardo. Imagine a wild frontier with plenty of fertile meadowland.
Okay, like prime farming land.
Exactly. So a pioneering farmer, let's call him Axel, arrives. There's no shortage of excellent land. In this situation, landlords can't really charge much rent because if one tries to charge too much, Axel will just go to another landlord down the road.
They compete with each other.
Right. The landlords compete, driving the rent down. So Axel pays very little.
Makes sense.
Now, here's where it gets interesting. Imagine more farmers arrive. Suddenly, that prime meadowland becomes scarce. There isn't enough for everyone. New farmers, like Bob, are willing to pay more for that fertile meadowland than for inferior scrubland that's still available further out, maybe rent-free. This scrubland is what economists call marginal land. It's the land at the very edge of being cultivated, the least desirable option currently in use. And it's crucial for setting prices.
Okay, so the marginal land is the baseline.
Precisely. The rent on that valuable meadowland will basically equal the difference in grain yield between the productive meadowland and this rent-free marginal land. So if meadowland produces 5 more bushels of grain a year than the scrubland, the rent will be 5 bushels.
Ah, okay.
Because if a landlord tries to charge, say, 6 bushels, the farmer will just say, forget it, and move to the free scrubland.
Right. They'll just take the next best option, so the value is relative.
Exactly. It shows that economic rent is always relative to that marginal land. The value of the best is always measured against the value of the next best alternative available.
Now, let's bring this powerful concept of economic rent back to our coffee shop. Just like that fertile meadowland, prime coffee bar locations are incredibly scarce and valuable. Think about those ground floor corner units in bustling city centers, or those spots right inside major train stations like London's Waterloo. These are unique locations.
That's precisely it. They have a constant flow of busy people, often, as the book says, price-blind customers during rush hour. They're just desperate for a convenient caffeine fix. Their high willingness to pay for that convenience sets the high rent for those prime spots.
Oh, okay. So it's not that the rent is high, forcing Costa to charge more.
Exactly. It's the other way around. It's the customer's high willingness to pay that makes those locations command exorbitant rents. This explains why you rarely see those prime spots used to sell, say, secondhand cars or maybe Chinese food.
Right.
It's not because they're bad locations for those businesses, but because those businesses don't typically have customers who are desperate and price blind enough to justify paying such high rent.
That makes a lot of sense. The book applies this further, right, to company profits.
Yes, exactly. Company profits, like land rents, are determined by the alternatives available. A company facing tough competition will naturally be less profitable than one with fewer rivals, one that has some kind of scarcity power.
Right.
And while physical land is fixed, companies can grow, but the book makes the point that they can't do it overnight without diluting their reputation. So this model helps explain corporate profitability over years, maybe even decades, as it takes time to build or erode these scarce capabilities or advantages.
And what's fascinating here is that high profits aren't always earned fairly, like through a better product or being more efficient. Sometimes companies enjoy what the book calls monopoly rents because new competitors are basically excluded from the market, kept out.
Yeah, this greenbelt effect, as Harford calls it, can happen for many reasons. Maybe customers only trust established companies, especially for certain products like embarrassing ones mentioned in the book, like condoms. Or firms might lobby governments hard for monopoly licenses in sensitive industries like banking or telecommunications.
Mm.
But the effect is the same. Established companies, free of that competitive pressure, can enjoy unusually high profits.
And this rent-seeking behavior, trying to create or capture this extra profit from scarcity, isn't just limited to corporations, is it?
No, not at all. Resource rents are sought by many groups. Trade unions, professional bodies, even governments themselves engage in this. The book calls this behavior creating rents or rent seeking.
So like trade unions.
Right. Trade unions, for example, aim to prevent workers from undercutting each other on wages, driving up pay for those inside the union. Historically, mass mechanization actually increased the incentive to unionize because workers became more easily substitutable, less scarce.
Ah, interesting.
But unions face challenges too. Public pressure, international competition, think Japanese cars impacting U.S. auto workers, or really powerful employers like Walmart. In the UK, for instance, teachers' wages might be relatively low despite shortages because the government effectively acts as a monopoly employer, a single buyer of their services.
And other professionals do this too.
Absolutely. Doctors, lawyers, accountants, they often maintain high wages by erecting virtual greenbelts through things like long qualification periods and powerful professional bodies that limit entry. As George Bernard Shaw famously quipped, the professions are all conspiracies against the laity. A bit cynical, perhaps, but captures the idea.
Ah, okay. You can even view something like immigration through this lens, right?
Yeah, the book suggests that. Skilled workers whose degrees or specialized skills are their scarce asset might actually benefit from more unskilled labor coming in, as it can keep unskilled wages relatively low. Interestingly, it's often previous immigrants who are most harmed economically by new immigration because it increases competition for jobs at their specific skill level.
So what does this all mean? It kind of highlights how self-interest, looking after your own scarcity power, often drives opposition to policies like immigration, even if the overall economic benefit might be positive.
Exactly. This focus on scarcity and incentives allows economists to deepen our understanding of a variety of situations, moving, as we've seen, from coffee prices all the way to immigration policy. It's about seeing the underlying mechanisms.
And the beauty of this approach, at least in theory, is its objective analysis, kind of like engineering. It tells you how things work and what is likely to happen if you change them. For example, allowing skilled immigrants in can potentially help control the wage gap between skilled and unskilled workers.
However, economists aren't always purely objective robots. They study things like poverty and power. It's hard to work with these models that explain such profound real-world issues and remain completely detached. Economists often become advocates for certain policies because they see a compelling logic that often forces them, as Harford puts it, to take a stand, much like David Ricardo himself campaigned against the protectionist corn laws in the 19th century.
Okay, let's revisit our cup of coffee, but with a slightly different angle. Imagine you're at a Costa coffee bar right next to the London Eye. That location has immense scarcity power over customers, right? All those tourists.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But the book points out this isn't really an inherent quality of Costa as a brand. It's more like reflected glory from the amazing setting. Anyone there would have that advantage. Now, the source tells us Costa originally charged a premium for fair trade coffee, which sounds good. But an organization like Cafe Direct, which paid farmers a premium of maybe 40, 55 pence per pound of coffee, which could nearly double a Guatemalan farmer's income. By the way, well, that premium translated to less than a single penny of extra cost per cup for Costa.
Less than a penny.
Right.
So if the actual cost premium to the farmer was that tiny, where did the rest of the extra money the customer paid go?
Yeah, that's the kicker. Over 90% of that additional charge was effectively going missing between the customer and the farmer. Costa, or companies like it, realized something interesting. Socially concerned citizens tend to be less careful with their cash in coffee bars. So they essentially charged a higher price to the concerned customer, £1.85, and a lower price to the unconcerned customer, £1.75. This is a perfect example of price targeting. They segmented their market based on willingness to pay.
Segmenting the market.
Yeah. Price targeting is all about trying to charge each customer or group of customers the maximum price they'd actually be willing to pay. This depends entirely on their price sensitivity, or what economists call own price elasticity, basically. How much their buying habits change when prices go up or down.
Okay, so how much you react to price changes?
Exactly. If customers are very price sensitive, even a small price increase makes them walk away or choose something else.
You see this at Disney World, apparently. They offer big discounts, like over 50% to Florida locals. And the book says it's not because locals are poorer, necessarily, but because they are more price sensitive. They have more alternatives. They can come back anytime.
Right. They're more likely to make repeat visits if it's cheaper. Tourists, however, they'll likely only come once, maybe as part of a big trip. They're less sensitive to the price for that one visit, so they get charged full fare. And it's not just about being rich or poor. Being rich doesn't automatically mean you're price insensitive. Think about business class air travel. It's expensive because companies are footing the bill, they're less price sensitive. But business telephone calls, those are often cheap because there's just so much competition among phone companies. Price sensitivity is high there.
Okay. And supermarkets are apparently masters of this.
Oh, absolutely. Supermarkets excel at price targeting. Have you ever noticed how organic apples are rarely placed directly next to the conventional apples? Or organic garlic right next to the regular stuff?
Huh, I hadn't really thought about it, but yeah, maybe you're right.
That's usually deliberate. A direct price comparison would be too sobering for the customer thinking about buying organic. Now, organic food should be somewhat more expensive due to higher production and distribution costs. Sure, but just like coffee, the raw ingredients are often a small part of the final price you pay at the till. Supermarkets cleverly use the organic movement to zap customers with well-aimed price increases, targeting those willing to pay a premium for perceived quality or ethical benefits.
What about places like Whole Foods? They have this reputation for being really expensive.
Right, but the book reveals a really interesting nuance there. Compared to a standard supermarket nearby, like the Soviet Safeway example in the book, Whole Foods does seem pricier if you just compare typical shopping baskets full of stuff. But, and this is key, as a matter of verifiable fact, when you compare the prices on the same goods, Whole Foods is just as inexpensive as Safeway.
Really? So why the expensive reputation?
It's expensive because of where its price targeting policies are focused. Whole Foods offers additional, more expensive choices like not just regular onions, but pearl onions, red onions, organic onions, shallots.
Ah, okay. Lots of premium options.
Exactly. And their specific shoppers are willing to pay for those perceived quality premiums or wider choices. It's not that their customers are stupid, as the book says, but they value those extras and are willing to pay the targeted higher price for them.
Okay, that makes sense. So why do stores have sales, varying prices drastically twice a year, instead of just setting a consistent, maybe lower price all year round?
Good question. Sales are actually a form of self-targeting. They allow stores to capture different customer segments. They can charge high prices most of the time to loyal customers, or maybe lazy ones who don't wait for sales. And then they use the low prices during sales to attract the bargain hunters. Apparently, a stable, middle-of-the-road price just doesn't work as well to maximize profits across these different groups.
Interesting. The book has another angle on this too, right? About premiums.
Yeah, it suggests viewing sales not just as discounts, but maybe thinking of the regular price as a premium on the sale price.
Right.
Companies seem to find it more profitable to impose unpredictable larger price increases, that's the gap between the sale price and the regular price, than predictable small ones. Why? Because customers find it harder to consistently avoid unpredictable price changes.
Like the potato chip example.
Exactly. Same brand, same size bag, different flavor side by side. But the top shelf salt and pepper flavor costs 25% more than the others. The customers reaching for that top shelf bag probably weren't meticulously price comparing flavors. They were signaling they were simply more interested in snacking right now and less price sensitive.
This deliberate approach to pricing seems to extend everywhere. Why is popcorn ridiculously expensive at the movies, or wine marked up so much at restaurants?
It's the same price targeting strategy at play. The really price sensitive moviegoers might sneak in their own snacks. But someone on a date, maybe not wanting to seem stingy, is much more likely to pay the inflated price for the popcorn. The cinema segments its audience. And this concept even extends to what the book calls deliberate sabotage of cheaper products. This is done to prevent leaks situations where wealthier, less price-sensitive customers might choose the cheaper option if it's too similar to the premium one. There's a great quote from a French railroad manager. What the company is trying to do is prevent the passengers who can pay the second-class fare from traveling third class. It hits the poor, not because it wants to hurt them, but to frighten the rich.
Wow, that's pretty blunt.
It is. But it explains why coach-class train cars often lack tables, or why basic airport departure areas are sometimes so uncomfortable or shoddy. It's partly to make the business class lounges and priority services appear much more exclusive and worth a significant extra cost.
Even holding people back on the plane.
Right. Flight attendants sometimes restrain economy passengers from deplaning before first class. It sends a clear, if unspoken, message. Keep paying for your expensive seats, or next time you might be the wrong side of the flight attendant. It reinforces the value of the premium product.
So, services and convenience products seem key here.
Absolutely. They are the most fertile grounds for price targeting strategies because they don't leak. It's hard to resell a bus trip or a half-eaten cup of coffee.
Okay, at first glance, a lot of these strategies seem pretty exploitative, maybe even cynical. But the book argues sometimes price targeting can actually be a good thing.
Yes, it can. Consider the thought experiment Harford presents about PillCorp, a hypothetical company with a life-saving HIV/AIDS drug. Developing such drugs is very expensive to research and develop. PillCorp needs to recoup those costs. Now, if PillCorp charges one high global price, say $1,000 per dose, to maximize profits without price targeting, many people in poor countries simply won't be able to afford it. They'll die.
That's awful.
It is. But what if PillCorp practices price targeting? What if it charges $1,000 in rich countries, but only $30 in developing countries? Suddenly, a whole new market opens up. Millions of new customers get access to the life-saving drug. PillCorp actually makes more profit because of the larger volume, and critically, rich customers are no worse off than before.
So it's a win-win situation.
Or at least, as economists would say, a clear improvement in efficiency. More people benefit, the company benefits, and the original group isn't harmed.
But there are challenges.
Of course. The main challenge is preventing those cheap pills from leaking back into rich countries and undermining the high price there. We've seen this issue with Canadian drug re-imports into the U.S. Interestingly, the Internet's transparency, while often good, can sometimes have a downside by making it harder for companies to offer these kinds of targeted discounts without facing backlash or arbitrage.
So what does this all mean? It shows how our moral intuitions can be a bit contradictory, right? We might despise something like DVD region coding, which feels like unfair price targeting, but we might approve of drug companies offering discounts to the poor, even though it's the same economic principle at work.
Exactly. Economics helps us unwrap these ethical conundrums. It shows that price targeting, while sometimes feeling unfair, can sometimes make vital products accessible to many more people than a single price system ever could.
Okay, so we've just talked about how markets, through things like price targeting, can sometimes lead to efficient, even win-win outcomes. Harford suggests that in an idealized world of perfect markets, everything is for the best resources go where they're most valued. But then, why do we get stuck in traffic jams? every day. That seems like a colossal waste of time and fuel. Where's the efficiency there?
Right, and this brings us to another crucial concept in economics: market failures. Situations where the free market, left to its own devices, doesn't lead to the best outcome. We've already touched upon one cause: scarcity power, or monopoly power. Now we turn to another major one: decisions that have side effects on bystanders. Economists call these externalities because the effects lie outside the original decision or transaction, like your individual decision to drive your car.
Okay, so my driving affects other people.
Exactly. When you get in your car, you're not just creating costs for yourself, gas, wear and tear, your own time. You're also creating misery for other people through adding to congestion and emitting pollution. And the crucial point is, drivers typically do not offer compensation for the costs they inflict on other people.
Yeah.
You don't pay the guy in the car behind you for making his commute 5 minutes longer.
No, you definitely don't. So because drivers aren't paying the full cost of their actions, the market signal is distorted.
Precisely. It's a classic market failure. Too many people drive at peak times because the personal cost they face is lower than the true cost to society.
So how do we understand this better? The book uses an analogy, right?
Yeah, to understand why this happens and how to potentially fix it, we need to distinguish between the marginal price and the average price.
Mm-hmm.
Think about those old-school college parties with an unlimited boozing ticket for an upfront fee, say, £10.
All right, I remember those. Vaguely.
Right. So for someone who ends up having 20 drinks over the night, the average price per drink is 50 pence, £10 divided by 20. But what's the marginal price? What's the price of the 21st drink?
Well, once you've paid the £10, it's zero. The next drink is free.
Exactly. Once you've paid the fee, you might as well keep drinking, which, as you hinted, can lead to chaos. The university's mistake in this analogy would be to just raise the upfront fee to £15. That doesn't change the incentive for the next drink, which is still zero.
Right, it doesn't change the marginal cost.
The real solution is to scrap the upfront fee entirely and charge people for what they actually drank. Pay per drink. That changes the marginal incentive.
Okay, so connecting this back, traffic congestion is similar.
Very similar. Drivers pay large upfront taxes, maybe vehicle registration fees, fuel taxes, but once those are paid, the next trip is always free in terms of its impact on congestion. It's this zero marginal cost of taking one more trip during rush hour that directly causes the congestion, not the total average tax paid over the year. People don't feel the immediate cost of adding their car to the jam.
So the solution, following the logic, is to make drivers pay for the true cost of each individual trip, including those externality costs they impose on others.
That's the economic argument, yes.
Mm.
The solution is to try and mimic perfect markets by making drivers pay all the costs of their actions. These externality costs, congestion, pollution, aren't typically reflected in the market price of gasoline or the car itself, so they need to be added somehow.
And these externality charges would effectively be government taxes, but with a specific purpose.
Right. They're not primarily about raising revenue, though they would do that. They're specifically designed to correct these market failures by aligning individual incentives with the broader societal costs and benefits, making the price reflect the true cost.
But people object to this, don't they?
Oh, definitely. Common objections are that it's an unfair tax on the poor, who might rely on cars more, or that the rich can still afford to pollute or cause congestion anyway, so what's the point?
Yeah, those are fair concerns. How does the book address them?
Well, it suggests we can design these externality charges to try and neutralize much of the redistribution. For example, you could scrap regressive upfront vehicle taxes and replace them with per-trip congestion charges. This shifts the burden from just owning a car to the actual act of driving in congested areas or polluting.
And the argument about the rich?
Even the rich don't usually pollute or sit in traffic just for fun. They will still respond to price signals. They might make fewer trips, choose less congested times, use public transport more, or buy cleaner cars. What's crucial from an economic efficiency standpoint is that externality charges are generally the most efficient way to achieve any given reduction in a negative activity like pollution or congestion. They let individuals decide the cheapest way for them to reduce their impact.
But do people actually change their behavior significantly in response to these kinds of charges? Does it work in practice?
History offers some pretty compelling examples that suggest, yes, people react strongly to price signals, sometimes in unexpected ways. In late 19th century New Orleans, houses were apparently taxed based on the number of stories visible from the front. This led to the famous Camelback houses, one story at the front, but with extra stories added to the back where the taxman couldn't see.
Oh, clever.
And in Britain, there was a window tax from 1696 to 1851. Predictably, this led to people building dingy houses with very few windows or bricking up existing ones to avoid the tax. People respond to incentives.
Okay, maybe a more modern example.
London's congestion charge, introduced in 2003, it charged £5 per day initially to drive into the city center during peak hours. The effect was dramatic. Within just a year, car rides into the zone fell by nearly a third. Bus usage soared. Motorcycle trips increased. Bicycle trips went way up. People adjusted. They changed their routes, their times, carpooled, worked from home, used alternatives.
Oh, that's a big shift.
It really was. And externality charges, or related market mechanisms like permit trading, can also do something else. They can reveal the true cost of solving problems, which is often lower than feared.
Like with acid rain.
Exactly. In the 1990s, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, tackled acid rain caused by sulfur dioxide emissions from power plants. Instead of just mandating specific reductions for every plant, they created a market for sulfur dioxide emission permits. Companies could buy and sell the right to pollute.
Okay.
Now, polluters typically exaggerate how much it will cost them to clean up their act when regulations are discussed. The EPA initially estimated that reducing sulfur pollution could cost anywhere from $250 up to $1,500 per ton.
But what happened when the permits were actually auctioned?
Polluters were forced to put their money where their mouth was. They had to reveal their true costs through bidding. And by 1996, the price of these permits had plummeted to just $70 a ton.
$70. Why so low?
Because many companies discovered it was actually much cheaper to switch to cleaner low-sulfur coal or install scrubbers to clean their emissions than it was to buy the permits. The auction revealed that getting rid of sulfur dioxide was so cheap that few people were willing to pay much for the right to keep producing it.
So the market mechanism uncovered the real lower cost.
Precisely. And it provided a basis for further legislation, not making rules in the dark, but in full knowledge of the modest cost.
Okay, so charging for negative externalities makes sense. What about the flip side? Positive externalities, things that benefit bystanders. Should we subsidize those?
Logically, it seems like we should. If an action creates benefits for others that aren't paid for, maybe a subsidy could encourage more of it. But the book warns it's not always straightforward. Harford gives an example. Imagine a government wrongly believes landlords and tenants aren't renovating apartments often enough, maybe thinking there's a positive externality like neighborhood improvement. So they offer a $500 subsidy for renovations. Now, suppose a specific renovation cost $1,000. It only benefits the tenant by $300, say in comfort, and the landlord by $500 in future higher rents. The total private benefit is $800.
Which is less than the $1,000 cost, so without the subsidy it wouldn't happen.
Right. It really should never have happened because the total benefit is less than the total cost to society. But with the $500 subsidy, the landlord and tenant only need to cover $500 of the cost between them. Since their combined benefit is $800, they will now do the renovation, perhaps bargaining over how to split the net gain.
Ah, so the subsidy causes an inefficient renovation to occur.
Exactly. Even if there was a small positive externality, if the government subsidizes and the parties can bargain amongst themselves, you might end up doing renovations that aren't actually worth the total cost. The book says the positive externality has been dealt with twice over, leading to inefficiency. You have to be careful with subsidies, too.
Right, so when we hear people say things like externality charges are bad for the economy, we should be cautious.
Yes, very cautious, because we need to ask, what is the economy? It's not just about the headline GDP, gross domestic product number. GDP measures the total cost of producing everything, more or less. It's a measure of activity.
But it doesn't capture everything we value.
Not at all. GDP doesn't account for leisure time. Relaxing on the beach adds nothing to GDP. Nor does it easily differentiate whether increased output is replacing something destroyed, like rebuilding houses after a hurricane, which boosts GDP, or creating genuinely new value.
So externality charges, even if they slightly reduce GDP in some narrow sense?
Are actually designed to make the economy more efficient overall. They aim to improve well-being by ensuring that the prices we face reflect the true societal costs of our actions. They lead to better, more sustainable outcomes, even if they don't always make the simple GDP number go up.
Okay, let's shift gears again and explore another fascinating type of market failure, one that really messes things up in areas from used cars all the way to healthcare. Imagine you're reading a medical dictionary, like the character Jerome K. Jerome in that classic book, 3 Men in a Boat. You start reading the symptoms for various diseases, and, before long, you've convinced yourself you have absolutely every ailment under the sun. Naturally, your first instinct would be to rush out and buy really generous medical insurance, just in case.
Right.
Yeah.
And this immediately raises an important question. If people could only buy health insurance after they already knew they were ill, who would want to insure them? It wouldn't make any sense for the insurance company. This is the absolute core of the problem known as asymmetric information, where one party in a transaction knows something crucial that the other party doesn't.
And the classic example of this comes from George Akerlof's revolutionary 1970 paper on the lemons problem, right? Using used cars.
Exactly. Imagine the market for used cars. Let's say half the cars on sale are peaches. They're good, reliable cars, worth maybe $5,000 to a buyer and $4,000 to the seller. The other half are lemons. They look okay, but they're basically worthless junk underneath.
Yeah.
Now, here's the asymmetry. The sellers know perfectly well whether they have a peach or a lemon, but the buyers don't. They just see a used car.
Okay, so the buyer has to guess.
Right. So buyers, knowing the risk, will only be willing to offer an average price, let's say $2,500, halfway between $5,000 and $0 roughly. But what happens then? A seller with a good peach car knows it's worth at least $4,000 to them. They won't sell it for $2,500, so they pull their good cars off the market,
Leaving only the lemons.
leaving only the lemons. Buyers quickly realize this. They know that any car still offered for sale at $2,500 must be a lemon, so they revise their offer downwards, maybe willing to pay only next to nothing for a known lemon. In this scenario, as Ekolov showed, there is no market for good used cars. It completely collapses, even though there are buyers willing to pay more than sellers need for those good cars.
Wow, so it's not just about people getting ripped off by buying a lemon. It's about a whole market that should exist, creating value for everyone, simply failing to function at all, destroyed by the corrosive force of inside information.
Precisely. And this lemons problem applies dramatically, and perhaps even more worryingly, to health insurance. People who know or suspect they are likely to be sick are, in this analogy, the lemons. Healthy people are the peaches. If, like Jerome K. Jerome, you think you might be a lemon, you'll be the first in line to buy comprehensive insurance.
While the healthy peaches might think, I probably don't need it that much.
Exactly. So,
Uh-huh.
insurance companies, not knowing for sure who is a lemon and who is a peach when they sign them up, have to set premiums based on the average expected cost of the people who buy insurance.
Mm.
But since the lemons are more likely to buy, that average cost is high. This high premium then drives out the healthy peaches who decide it's just too expensive for their low risk.
Which leaves an even sicker, riskier pool of customers.
Correct. Which forces premiums to rise even further, leading potentially to a complete unraveling of the market for individual health insurance. It's a vicious cycle, often called the adverse selection death spiral.
So what do insurance companies try to do about this?
Well, they tried desperately to get more information to figure out who's a lemon and who's a peach before setting the price. They asked about smoking habits, age, family medical history. They might even want access to genetic data in the future, all to try and close that information gap.
But if they get too good at predicting risk,
That creates another problem. If they get too accurate, high-risk individuals, the known lemons, might face premiums of hundreds of thousands of dollars per year. At that point, as the book notes, it's hardly insurance at all. Insurance is about spreading risk, not just prepaying your expected medical bills.
so it seems people with high medical needs, the elderly, the chronically ill, find that their insurance company does not really give them much insurance at all because their premiums are just adjusted upwards to cover their predicted high costs. The risk isn't truly shared.
That's often the outcome in a purely private market grappling with severe asymmetric information. Now, how do markets try to overcome these information gaps more generally? Economist Michael Spence showed that trustworthy vendors, the peaches, find ways to signal their reliability to potential customers. They deliberately incur costs to show they are not lemons.
Okay, like how?
This is why banks, traditionally, built those impressive marble buildings with huge columns. It wasn't just for show, it was a costly signal that they were stable, established, and not some fly-by-night operation about to disappear with your money.
Ah, okay. The
Okay.
costliness of the signal makes it credible.
Exactly. Or think about why an established store might charge slightly more than a temporary market stall for the same item. Part of what you're paying for is the signal that they'll still be there next week if you need to return it. They have a reputation to uphold.
Makes sense.
Spence also argued that high-quality job applicants might pursue expensive university degrees, even if the degree itself doesn't directly add many practical job skills. Why? Because successfully completing a difficult, costly degree signals their inherent quality, intelligence, or perseverance to potential employers who can't easily assess those traits directly.
So all these things, lavish decorations, buildings, and advertising, they aren't just waste. They serve a critical economic function.
Yes, they help trustworthy sellers or high-quality individuals
Huh.
distinguish themselves from low-quality competitors, bridging that crucial information gap in the market.
Given all these inherent information problems in healthcare, it's maybe not surprising that the book describes the U.S. private insurance system as patchy, costly, and bureaucratic.
Hmm.
The administrative costs alone in the U.S. are cited as exceeding $1,000 per person per year, which is more than the entire cost of medical care per person in places like Singapore or the Czech Republic.
Right. And a significant chunk of that huge bureaucratic burden comes from insurance companies struggling to monitor the risks, behavior, and expenses of their customers, precisely because of this asymmetric information. They spend a fortune trying to figure out who's a lemon and what treatments are truly necessary. Even the somewhat clunky linkage of health insurance to jobs in the U.S. is partly an attempt to solve the adverse selection problem. It forces healthy people, peaches, into the insurance pool, along with the less healthy lemons. But it often leads to other inefficiencies, like wasteful spending, because HR managers, not the patients themselves, are often choosing the plans.
Okay, so if the market struggles so much due to information failures, can governments do better? What about systems like the UK's National Health Service, NHS?
Well, the NHS, being government-funded and universal, largely avoids the market failures of adverse selection and lemons problems.
Hmm.
Everyone's in the pool. But it faces what economists call government failure. With essentially limited taxpayer money and virtually unlimited public demand for healthcare, difficult choices have to be made. Someone has to ration care. In the UK, bodies like NICE, the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, are tasked with these near-impossible decisions about which treatments are funded and which aren't.
How do they even begin to make those calls?
NICE tries to use a systematic approach, often calculating the cost-effectiveness of treatments, using measures like quality-adjusted life years, or QALYs, trying to get the most health bang for the public buck. But this inevitably forces incredibly difficult value judgments. How do you compare a treatment that improves someone's ability to walk with one that prevents blindness, which provides more quality? And the logical extreme of this purely utilitarian calculation can lead to, as the book puts it, truly unpalatable conclusions. For instance, a strict quality analysis might suggest it's more worthwhile to help the person who can see rather than the blind patient if both suffer a coronary arrest, simply because the seeing person has more potential QALYs left. It's ethically fraught.
Yeah, that's difficult. So this really highlights the trade-offs. Market failure versus government failure. Is there a middle ground? A keyhole solution, as the book calls it. Could we fix healthcare's information problems without sacrificing the ability of patients to decide, say, how much they value their own eyesight?
Keyhole economics tries to find targeted solutions for specific failures. In healthcare, scarcity power is relatively minor for most treatments, and externalities are less significant than the information problems. So the big one is imperfect information, the lemons problem, which destroys insurance markets.
Okay, so what's the proposed keyhole treatment?
The book suggests a two-part approach. First, ensure widespread information availability. Make it easy for patients to get second opinions, access helpline advice, understand treatment options and costs. The idea is that patients would pay more attention and make better choices if they had good information and were more responsible for the costs. Second, give patients the opportunity and incentive to use this information. This means patients should probably pay directly for many routine medical costs, making them more cost-conscious. But crucially, this needs to be combined with catastrophe insurance to protect them from the largest, most unpredictable, and potentially bankrupting medical bills.
So how would that work in practice?
The book points towards a system, perhaps like Singapore's, where everyone has a compulsory medical savings account, possibly with government contributions, especially for the poor. Most everyday medical bills would come out of this personal account. Catastrophe insurance, maybe also compulsory, would kick in to cover expenses above a certain high threshold. And critically, any unused savings in the account could roll over year to year, maybe even eventually going towards pensions or being passed on to heirs. This gives individuals a very strong incentive to spend their healthcare dollars wisely on things they truly value.
So this system aims to compel patients to pay for many of the costs directly, fostering responsibility and encouraging cost-effectiveness for routine care, while still providing a safety net against truly catastrophic expenses.
Exactly. The book highlights Singapore's system, which has operated along these lines for decades, achieving good health outcomes, high life expectancy, and comparatively lower costs than many Western countries, all while maintaining significant patient choice. It's presented as a potential model that tries to balance market incentives with universal protection.
Okay, let's switch gears again. Moving from the complexities of healthcare to the often dynamic and sometimes, frankly, bewildering world of the stock market. Consider Amazon.com. Its share price went on this incredible roller coaster, over $100 in 1999 during the dot-com boom, then crashing down to just $8 in 2001, only to climb back up to around $40 by 2004. So the question is, which price was the mistake? Was $100 crazy? Was $8 ridiculously cheap? Or maybe both were wrong?
It's a great question. Economists traditionally think about valuing a share based on the discounted present value of its expected future profits and dividends. What cash will this company generate for its owners over time? Now, if Amazon only made about 8 cents per share in profit back in 2003 and interest rates were around 4%, a simple calculation suggests its shares should have been worth maybe $2, not the $40 they were trading at.
$2 versus $40, that's a huge gap.
It is, and that huge gap tells you that something else is the future. Investors weren't buying Amazon for its 8 cents of profit then. They were buying it based on expectations of massive profit growth in the future.
So investors paying $40 were clearly expecting Amazon's earnings per share to absolutely skyrocket, maybe to $1.60 or more to justify that price. That implies profits would have to soar from around $35 million to over $1 billion a year. A huge bet on future dominance.
Exactly. And this forward-looking nature is what makes the market so complex. John Maynard Keynes famously described the stock market not as picking the stocks you think are best, but more like a beauty contest.
A beauty contest.
Yeah, where the goal isn't to pick the contestant you personally find most beautiful, but to pick the one you think other judges will find most beautiful. You're trying to anticipate the crowd's opinion. This reflects what the book calls the Grolsch method of investing, trying to figure out and exploit what other investors are likely to do next, rather than just focusing purely on a company's long-term fundamental value.
And this is where it gets, as the book puts it, kind of rationally insane.
Precisely. The story of Tony Dye, who was the chief investment officer of Phillips & Drew, a big UK fund manager, perfectly illustrates this dilemma. Back in 1996, Dye looked at the market, the FTSE 100 index, and concluded it was significantly overvalued at around 4,000 points. He believed a crash was coming. So he courageously moved £7 billion, a huge amount of his clients' money, out of stocks and into safer cash investments.
Wow, that's a big call. What happened?
Well, for a while, it looked like a terrible call. He was widely mocked and nicknamed Dr. Doom because the market didn't crash immediately. Instead, the FTSE kept climbing, making almost 7,000 points over the next few years. Phillips & Drew started losing clients who were angry about missing out on those gains, and poor Tony Dye was eventually forced into early retirement in March 2000.
So he was wrong.
Here's the punchline. Almost immediately after Dye was forced out, the dot-com bubble burst, and the market crashed spectacularly. It wasn't that Dye's fundamental analysis was wrong. He was just early, too early for the market's psychology.
So what does this all mean? It shows how tricky it is.
It really does. It shows how many major fund managers, even if they suspect the market is overvalued, feel pressured to keep dancing while the music is playing. They're often being paid to follow fashion instead of pick the right shares because their performance is judged month to month, not over the long term it might take for fundamentals to assert themselves.
Is there any way to get a longer perspective on whether the market is truly expensive?
Yes, the book points to the work of Yale economist Robert Shiller, who looked at historical price earnings, PE ratios, going all the way back to 1881. The PE ratio compares a company's share price to its annual earnings per share. Shiller's data clearly shows that, historically, a PE ratio for the overall market above 30 is highly unusual, bordering on bubble territory. It had only really happened twice before the crazy days of the late 1990s, once in 1928 and then again in the late 90s bubble.
1928, that rings a bell.
It should. In 1928, another prominent Yale economist, Irving Fisher, famously declared just before the Wall Street crash that stock prices had reached what looks like a permanently high plateau.
Ouch. Famous last words.
Indeed. It serves as a powerful cautionary tale against getting caught up in the euphoria and believing this time it's different. History suggests it usually isn't.
So connecting this back to the dot-com bubble of the late 90s and early 2000s, what was the key economic lesson there, according to Harford?
The crucial lesson ties back to our earlier discussion about scarcity. Long-lasting profitability for a company comes from having some capability that others cannot match. A durable competitive advantage, scarcity power.
Right, not just being new or techy.
Exactly. The book points out that major economic transformations driven by new technologies, think railroads in the 19th century, or electricity, or the internet, often destroy the profitability of established older firms. And these transformations usually come with very large costs and incredibly high failure rates for the pioneering new companies trying to exploit the technology. Many startups fail.
So who actually benefits most from these big technological shifts?
Often, the primary benefits flow not to the initial investors in the new tech companies, but rather to workers, through higher wages eventually, and especially to customers, through lower prices, new products, and greater convenience.
Okay, so how did this apply to the dot-coms?
Many, perhaps most, of those early dot-com companies had business models that, frankly, could have been duplicated at minimal cost in a matter of months. They lacked any real sustainable scarcity power. This fundamental lack of a unique, defensible advantage should have been a clear signal that their long-term value was likely low, despite the initial hype. Competition would inevitably flood in and erode any temporary profits.
There was that consultant, Graham Bailey, mentioned in the book.
Right, Graham Bailey, a management consultant back in 1998, was arguing for a gold rush vision for internet companies. His advice was, get there first, stake out territory online. But the problem, as Harford points out, is that unlike real gold rush settlers who got legal property rights to their claims, these early internet companies often only had domain names and maybe some initial brand recognition. And those are easy come, easy go in the fast-moving digital world.
And what's fascinating here.
Yeah, what's fascinating is that at the very moment Bailey was giving this advice, advocating for just being first, Google was being established then just a tiny startup in a garage. Google's eventual massive success didn't come from just being first. It wasn't the first search engine. It came from true scarcity power, a genuinely superior search algorithm, and a unique, hard-to-replicate ability to organize the world's information. That was their defensible advantage.
So what are the lessons for us as maybe small investors from all this?
Well, the book suggests a couple of clear takeaways. First, if you're trying to make serious money by picking individual stocks, you really need to ask yourself, what specific knowledge or insight do you have that the professional market insiders, the ones setting the prices, are somehow ignoring or getting wrong? It's a high bar.
Be humble about what you know.
Exactly. And second, remember that true, long-lasting profitability for a company almost always comes from some capability that others cannot match. That could be a powerful, trusted brand built over decades, like Trojan condoms mentioned in the book, or maybe control of an industry standard, like Microsoft Windows, or genuinely superior, hard-to-replicate expertise, like General Electric in its heyday. Maybe eBay has this scarcity through its locked-in base of loyal buyers and sellers, the network effect. But very few other early internet companies really did, which is a major reason why Graham Bailey's own consulting firm, ironically, went bankrupt in 2001 when the bubble burst.
Okay, now let's broaden our scope significantly. Let's embark on a journey across continents and tackle one of the biggest and most persistent questions in economics. Why are some countries rich while others remain stubbornly poor? Harford takes us to Douala, Cameroon, a city he vividly, if maybe harshly, describes as the armpit of Africa. It's a bustling city home to 2 million people, but strikingly, it has no real roads, it's humid, chaotic, and its people are, on average, 8 times poorer than the average citizen of the world. It's a picture of deep poverty.
Right, and this poverty presents a puzzle for traditional economic theory. Standard theory suggests that poor countries should actually catch up relatively quickly with rich ones. Why? Because of diminishing returns in rich countries. Adding one more road or factory in Germany yields a smaller gain than adding the first decent road or factory in a very poor country.
So investments should have huge payoffs in poor countries.
Exactly. New investments, roads, schools, basic machinery should yield enormous returns, and copying existing technologies developed elsewhere should be much easier and cheaper than inventing them from scratch. So poor countries should grow faster.
But this clearly isn't happening in Cameroon, according to the book.
No. Despite billions of dollars in development aid flowing in over the years from organizations like the World Bank, those crucial investments either aren't being made effectively or they aren't delivering the expected returns. Something is fundamentally broken. As a local driver in Douala named Sam bluntly told Harford, there's plenty of money, but they put it in their pockets. Corruption.
That suggests the problem isn't necessarily a lack of resources, but a breakdown in how those resources are managed and, well, governed.
Precisely. This leads us to the work of economist Mancur Olson, who proposed a rather darker, but perhaps more realistic working assumption about governments in some contexts. He suggested we can sometimes view governments essentially as bandits, the group with the biggest guns able to extract resources from the population.
Bandits. That's a stark view.
It is. But Olson theorized that even among bandits, there's a difference. A stable dictatorship, led by a stationary bandit who expects to stay in power for a long time, say 20 years, might actually be better for economic growth than complete anarchy ruled by roving bandits who just loot everything and flee.
Why would a dictator be better than anarchy?
Because the stationary bandit has an incentive to cultivate the economy to some extent. They won't kill the goose that lays the golden eggs entirely. They need the economy to function so they can keep stealing from it year after year.
Okay, so they have a longer-term view, even if it's self-interested.
Right. However, Olson argued, even a stable dictator, like Cameroon's long-serving President Biya mentioned in the book, still severely damages long-term growth. If the dictator effectively steals, say, half the country's income through arbitrary taxes or corruption, it drastically reduces the incentive for anyone else, farmers, business owners, to invest, work hard, or innovate. Why bother if half your earnings will be taken? As the book reminds us, taxes cause inefficiency, and when taxes are unpredictable, opaque, and effectively theft, they cripple economic activity.
And this problem isn't just at the very top with the president.
No. Harford's account suggests it permeates the system. Driving from Buea to Bamenda in Cameroon, the minibuses constantly encounter blockades and crooked police officers demanding bribes just to pass. This pervasive petty corruption is hugely wasteful. The police are apparently too busy extorting money to actually bother catching criminals, and the constant stops and negotiations dramatically increase travel times and costs, imposing a hidden tax on everyone trying to do business.
So these are like metaphorical roadblocks throughout the economy?
Exactly. They're everywhere. The World Bank found that just setting up a small, legitimate business in Cameroon costs nearly as much as the average Cameroonian makes in 2 years. Just initial fees and hurdles. Buying property. Expect to pay about a fifth of its value in fees and bribes. Trying to enforce an unpaid invoice to the courts, that takes, on average, 2 years and involves 58 separate bureaucratic procedures.
58 procedures.
Yeah. And each one of those steps is another opportunity for an official to demand a bribe. This creates a perverse incentive for those in power to maintain a complex, inefficient, and corrupt system because they benefit directly from it. It actively discourages legitimate economic activity.
The book gives a really striking, almost absurd example of this systemic dysfunction, right? The library.
Oh, yes. The story of the new library at a prestigious Cameroonian school is incredible. It was designed with this unique, aesthetically pleasing V-shaped roof, meant to look like an open book. Very symbolic. But there was a critical, catastrophic design flaw. The V-shape acted like a giant funnel, collecting rainwater during the 5 solid months of the rainy season and dumping it directly onto the flat-roofed entrance hall below, completely destroying the interior.
Unbelievable. How could that happen?
What's fascinating and revealing is why it happened. It was only possible because, according to the account, nobody was monitoring the principal or her spending. Staff promotions depended entirely on the principal's decisions, so nobody dared to object to her pet project, even when the flaw became obvious. They had no incentive to speak up. The only person who did object was the VSO librarian, an international volunteer accountable to an outside organization. She defied the principal and managed to save the books from being moved into the doomed, leaky building.
So what was the principal's motivation then, if not a working library?
According to the librarian Harford spoke to, the principal's main goals were simply to demonstrate that the library had some books in it for appearances, and perhaps more importantly, to qualify the school as a university, which presumably came with status or funding. A functioning library was secondary. It's a stark illustration of how, if a society cannot provide the right kind of incentives, no amount of technical infrastructure, like a fancy library building, can save it from poverty. The incentives were wrong, so the outcome was disastrous.
Okay, let's contrast this bleak picture with China's incredible economic transformation over recent decades. In Shanghai today, you see gleaming skyscrapers, many just a decade old, in a city that for most of the 20th century was actually poorer than Cameroon. China suffered devastating famines in the chaos of the Cultural Revolution. How did they turn it around?
The turning point came after Mao's death, when Deng Xiaoping initiated crucial reforms starting in 1978. Deng famously asserted that socialism does not mean poverty. He understood, perhaps implicitly, the power of incentives. He began in agriculture. He significantly raised the prices the state paid farmers for their crops by nearly a quarter for basic quotas and over 40% for any surplus crops produced above the quota. He also introduced the household responsibility system, which effectively allowed families to lease land from the communes and, crucially, keep the profits from any surplus they produced beyond the state quota.
So they got a benefit directly from working harder or smarter.
Exactly. This simple change brought the world of truth into China, as the book puts it. Farmers responded dramatically to the new incentives. Agricultural output soared by an astounding 40% in just 5 years. Why? Because incentives matter.
And then they applied similar ideas to industry.
Yes. China then implemented a really clever and pragmatic strategy called growing out of the plan. Instead of trying to dismantle the entire state-controlled command economy overnight, which probably would have caused chaos, they essentially froze its size. But, crucially, they allowed a parallel market economy to operate and grow at the margin.
How did that work for factories?
State-owned factories still had their required planned output quotas to fulfill for the state. But managers were now allowed to produce additional output beyond the plan and sell it on the emerging open market. And importantly, they got to keep a share of the profits from that extra market-based production.
So again, a direct incentive for efficiency and growth at the margin.
Precisely. This provided stability for existing workers tied to the plan. But it created huge incentives for managers to become more efficient, find new customers, and make investments that were actually profitable because they benefited directly. The book notes that during this period, for every 100 yuan invested, China's annual output grew by 72 yuan, an incredibly high return, suggesting investments were being chosen much more wisely than under the old central planning system. Managers now had an incentive to make sure that the investments were profitable.
This market at the margins seems key. It allowed efficient firms to expand based on real demand, not just government directives.
It was absolutely crucial. It allowed the dynamic market sector to gradually grow and eventually overshadow the stagnant planned sector without the massive disruption seen in some other transitions from communism.
What other factors played a role in China's boom?
China's dramatic opening up to the world and embracing international trade was another huge factor. From being an economic minnow in global trade in 1990, it rapidly grew to become the world's fourth largest exporter within about 15 years.
How did they manage that?
A key part was actively inviting foreign companies to invest in China. This wasn't just about the money. It allowed China to rapidly learn modern production and business techniques. Things we take for granted, like quality control, supply chain logistics, modern accounting, things that were largely lost or irrelevant during the communist decades. They set up special economic zones, like Shenzhen right across the border from Hong Kong, which acted as magnets for foreign investment and rapidly transformed from sleepy fishing villages into massive, modern industrial cities.
So learning from the outside was critical. Was there anything else? Luck.
While having a huge potential domestic market certainly helped provide scale, but the book also highlights another factor. China's prior commitment to education, even during the communist era, meant it had a huge reservoir of skilled and potentially productive workers ready to be employed when the market reforms unleashed economic opportunities. This was a key advantage over many other poor countries, perhaps like Cameroon, which hadn't invested as much in basic education and skills for its population. Human capital mattered.
Okay, let's turn our attention now to globalization itself. Is it a force for good, a force for bad? It's a hotly debated topic. Harford starts by contrasting the historical stories of two nearby Belgian cities, Bruges and Antwerp. Bruges, back in the 15th century, was a major, prosperous trading hub, thriving on its global connections through its port. But then its harbor gradually silted up. It lost its connection to the sea to global trade. And Bruges declined, becoming Bruges Le Mort, a beautiful, preserved museum piece, yes, but economically stagnant, cut off.
Right. Meanwhile, nearby Antwerp, which remained connected to the world via the navigable Scheldt River, effectively took over Bruges' role. Antwerp thrived, becoming an economic powerhouse precisely because it maintained those global trade links. The simple, if maybe brutal message from this comparison is, if you would like to be rich, then it is a good idea to forge close links with the rest of the world. If you prefer nothing to change, then it is best to have a harbor that silts up. Isolation tends to lead to stagnation.
And today, we see the signs of globalization everywhere, don't we? The book calls it the most visible manifestation of the world's increasing economic interdependence. You find foreign products everywhere. Starbucks coffee in Shanghai, Belgian Duvel beer available in Washington, D.C.
Exactly. And some people worry about this. They fear it leads to a bland, global sameness, where every city starts to look and feel the same.
Does Harford agree with that fear?
Not entirely. He argues that while cultures and economies certainly influence each other and may increasingly resemble each other in some ways, globalization also creates tremendous diversity and exciting new mixes.
Mm.
Think about fusion cuisine or world music. New ideas are constantly arising from these global interactions.
Hmm.
He suggests that globalization will never homogenize what we have because innovation continues.
Okay, let him hack the core economic argument for trade, which goes back to David Ricardo again and his idea of comparative advantage. This can be a bit tricky, right?
It can be counterintuitive, but it's absolutely fundamental to understanding why economists are generally so pro-trader. The core idea is this. Even if one person or one country is objectively better, more productive at producing everything compared to another, both parties can still benefit from specializing in trading. They should each specialize in producing the good or service where they have a comparative advantage, meaning where their relative productivity advantage is greatest or their relative disadvantage is smallest.
Okay, an example might help.
The book uses a great, if slightly humorous, analogy involving the famous biologist E.O. Wilson and the author Tim Harford himself. Let's imagine Wilson is not only a brilliant biologist, but also a naturally gifted writer, maybe 20 times as good an economics writer as Harford is. But Wilson is perhaps 10 million times more accomplished and productive when it comes to writing about biology, his actual field.
Okay, so Wilson is better at both, but vastly better at biology.
Exactly. So Ricardo's advice would be for E.O. Wilson to focus all his time on writing biology books, where his advantage is immense, his opportunity cost of writing economics is huge. And Harford should focus on writing economics books, even though Wilson could do it better, because economics is where Harford's relative advantage lies, or perhaps where his disadvantage is smallest. It's his best option compared to trying to compete in biology.
So, by specializing in their comparative advantage.
Both Wilson and Harford are better off. They produce more total output, more biology books and more economics books between them than if they both tried to do everything themselves. Then they can trade, or, in this analogy, readers benefit from both. Everyone wins by specializing based on relative productivity.
Okay, that makes sense. But this concept becomes really controversial when you apply it to trade between countries, especially with different wage levels like the US and China.
Absolutely. Protectionists often raise the alarm, saying things like, Chinese wages are so much lower than ours. They can make everything cheaper. We need tariffs or anti-dumping laws to protect our jobs.
Yeah, you hear that argument a lot.
But the book argues this typically isn't dumping, selling below cost. It's simply competition based on comparative advantage, which might stem from lower wages, different technologies, or resource endowments. And when imports, say cheap Chinese furniture, are blocked by tariffs to protect American furniture manufacturers, it certainly helps those specific manufacturers and their workers, yes. But it simultaneously harms the average American consumer, who now has to pay higher prices for furniture, reducing their purchasing power for other things. The cost is spread thinly, but it's real.
So Ricardo's insight is that trade barriers hurt both sides.
Generally, yes. His core point is that trade barriers, tariffs, quotas, excessive regulations usually make both countries worse off in aggregate compared to free trade. Even if China were hypothetically better, more productive, at making both TVs and machine drills than America, Ricardo would argue America should still specialize in what it's least bad at relative to China, maybe machine drills in this example, and trade those drills for Chinese TVs. Both countries save time and resources by specializing, leading to higher overall consumption possibilities for both. And remember, ultimately, exports must pay for imports. Trade is a two-way street. It's a circular flow of goods, services, and money.
The book mentions something called Lerner's theorem. How does that fit in?
Ah, yes. Lerner's symmetry theorem is a neat, if slightly technical, point. It basically shows that imposing a tax on imports, like a tariff, to protect a specific domestic industry, say U.S. TV manufacturing, has the exact same overall economic effect as imposing a tax on the exports of your country's more efficient industries, say U.S. machine drills.
How can taxing imports be the same as taxing exports?
Because trade has to balance. By making imports more expensive, you indirectly make it harder for foreigners to earn the dollars they need to buy your exports. So restricting imports implicitly restricts exports. It highlights that the U.S. TV industry, in this example, isn't just competing against foreign TV makers, it's also competing against the domestic U.S. machine drill industry for scarce resources like capital and skilled labor. Protecting the less efficient industry harms the more efficient one.
Okay, that's a powerful way to think about it. What about the environmental concerns often raised about globalization? The fear of a race to the bottom.
That's another common criticism, that free trade encourages companies to relocate production to countries with lax environmental regulations, leading to more pollution globally.
Does the book find evidence for that?
Harford argues that the idea that trade is bad for the environment is based on weak thinking and little evidence. He makes several points. First, most international trade actually occurs between rich countries, which tend to have broadly similar and relatively strict environmental standards already. Second, many heavily polluting industries also require high levels of skill, stable infrastructure, and R&D, so they often tend to stay located in richer countries, despite potentially lower environmental costs elsewhere. And third, environmental standards are actually rising, not falling, in major developing economies like China, Mexico, and Brazil as they get richer and their citizens demand better environmental quality.
So protectionism isn't necessarily the environmental answer.
In fact, the book argues protectionism itself can be environmentally damaging. The prime example given is the EU's Common Agricultural Policy, CAP. By heavily subsidizing European farmers, the CAP encourages intensive farming methods with high pesticide and fertilizer use, generates huge surpluses that are sometimes dumped on developing countries, harming their farmers, and disproportionately benefits the richest landowners, not small family farms.
And the link between poverty and environment.
That's a crucial point. Harford stresses that the most deadly and certain environmental problems of today, things like respiratory diseases caused by indoor pollution from burning wood or dung for cooking, or illnesses from unsafe drinking water, are primarily problems of poverty. The most effective long-term cure for these devastating environmental problems is economic growth, and trade can help drive that growth, allowing countries to afford cleaner technologies and infrastructure.
So the argument that trade-led growth causes climate change, and therefore we should somehow keep poor countries poor to save the planet.
Leads to a stark conclusion, as the book puts it, that very few people would actually be comfortable with, given the terrible human cost of ongoing global poverty. There are better ways to address climate change than enforcing poverty.
This brings us to another really difficult and emotional issue tied to globalization: sweatshops. The conditions, long hours, low wages, poor safety, sound horrific.
They often are, by our standards. But Harford argues, quite controversially, that sweatshops are the symptom, not the cause, of shocking global poverty. He points out that workers typically go to these factories voluntarily. This implies, however grimly, that their alternatives must be even worse.
Worse than a sweatshop? Like what?
Things like working illegally on the street, engaging in prostitution, or scavenging through garbage dumps like Manila's infamous Smoky Mountain, which is described in the book. These are often the only other options available. In fact, turnover rates in multinational factories in poor countries are often surprisingly low, suggesting that workers, despite the hardship, perceive the jobs as relatively better in terms of pay or stability than the local alternatives.
So the solution isn't boycotting companies that use these factories.
Harford argues strongly against boycotts. He suggests the solution isn't fewer sweatshops, but more multinational companies competing for labor. He points to the historical experience of countries like South Korea or Taiwan. They started with sweatshop-like conditions, but as they opened up to foreign investment and export-oriented growth, competition for workers gradually drove wages up, spurred investment in education, and eventually led to dramatic reductions in poverty. The sweatshops have moved elsewhere, to poorer countries still earlier on that development ladder.
What about policies like the one in New York City, mentioned in the book, to only buy things like uniforms if they are made under decent wages and factory conditions? That sounds like a good thing.
It sounds well-intentioned, absolutely. But Harford argues such policies can only harm sweatshop laborers in the short run. If factories are forced to raise wages or conditions significantly above the local market level due to this external pressure, they might become uncompetitive, lose the contracts, and shut down. The workers then lose their jobs and are forced back into those even worse alternatives. He also suggests these policies often benefit domestic special interest groups like the Unite Garment Workers Union in the U.S., who drafted that specific NYC resolution more than they help the poor workers overseas. It can be a form of disguised protectionism.
Okay, so if free trade seems to have so many benefits, according to economists, why does the world still have so many trade barriers? Why isn't free trade universal? Economists seem almost universally agreed that it's generally a great advance. The book mentions Japan's national income increasing by 2/3 when it was forced to open its ports to trade in the 1850s after centuries of isolation.
The answer frustratingly perhaps, seems to lie in politics and the power of special interest groups with disproportionate influence. Tariffs, quotas, and other barriers typically impose a small and disguised cost on most of the country. We all pay slightly higher prices, but it's hard to notice or organize against. But these same barriers offer substantial benefits for a narrowly concentrated group of people, the specific industry being protected, its owners, and its workers. This small group has a very strong incentive to lobby aggressively to maintain those protections.
And the general public.
Voters are often not well informed about the complex economic arguments or the true costs of protectionism, or they might just be influenced by inertia and nervousness about change, making it easier for protectionist arguments, often framed around jobs or national security, to succeed politically.
Does the type of political system matter?
The book suggests it does. Countries with better established democracies and stronger checks and balances tend to have lower trade barriers overall, like the US, the EU members, compared to countries with less robust democratic institutions or where specific industries have more direct political influence, like Korea, Argentina, China, India, or Cameroon, are cited as having higher barriers historically. It even notes that Japan's rulers during its long period of isolation, the Tokugawa clan, deliberately imposed that isolation partly to maintain their own political control, fearing foreign influences.
And in the U.S., there was a change after 1934.
Yes. A significant shift happened when President Franklin D. Roosevelt was granted the power by Congress to negotiate trade treaties directly with other countries. This shifted power away from individual members of Congress, who might be beholden to specific local industries seeking protection, towards the president, who generally represents the broader national interest. After this shift, U.S. tariffs, which had been very high, fell significantly over the following decades as the U.S. took a leading role in promoting global trade liberalization. Concentrated benefits versus diffuse costs is a powerful political dynamic.
Wow. Okay. We have really covered a huge amount of ground today, diving into the Undercover Economist. We've seen how that fundamental principle of scarcity really does shape almost everything, from the price of your morning coffee to big corporate profits and even professional wages. Then we explored the sophisticated and sometimes sneaky world of price targeting, how businesses strategically charge different prices to different customers, and how, maybe surprisingly, this can sometimes actually be beneficial, like with life-saving drugs.
Yeah, and we unpacked market failures. We looked at externalities like traffic jams and pollution, where those hidden side effects cause major inefficiency. And we saw how asymmetric information, the lemons problem, can completely destroy markets, especially in really critical areas like health insurance.
We also peeked into the stock market's rational insanity, didn't we? And the crucial importance of genuine, hard-to-copy scarcity for creating long-term value, rather than just chasing fleeting trends or being first.
And finally, we journeyed from Cameroon to China to understand the deep roots of the wealth and poverty of nations, revealing just how critical the right incentives and trustworthy institutions are, alongside things like education and, yes, globalization, while also trying to dispel some common myths about international trade and sweatshops along the way.
So what's the big takeaway here?
I think what we've really learned from the Undercover Economist is that economics isn't just about dry statistics or complicated graphs. At its heart, it's about people, their choices, their incentives, their interactions. It's a really powerful toolkit for understanding the world around you, for questioning the assumptions you might hold, and for seeing the hidden social patterns, the underlying logic that explain why things often are the way they are.
It gives you a new lens to look through.
Exactly. By understanding these core concepts, scarcity, incentives, information, externalities, you gain a much deeper appreciation for the complex, intricate dance that governs so much of our daily lives, from the supermarket aisle to global politics.
So, as you, our listeners, go about your week, maybe we can leave you with this thought to chew on. Where in your own life, or perhaps in the news you read or watch, can you now spot a hidden incentive at play? Or maybe an instance where scarcity power or asymmetric information is really driving an outcome? And just as a thought experiment, if you could adjust just one of those economic levers you've spotted, what impact do you think it might have? We really encourage you to look at the world with these new undercover economist eyes and see these forces shaping the world all around you.